I woke up to the quiet tapping on the door. The hands of the old clock read 5 in the morning, a time when the whole house should be asleep. However, our house lived on a special schedule, built around one person, Toby. Grandma, my grandson whispered, poking his head through the doorway. Are you awake? I smiled, pulling back the blanket. Come here, sunshine. Toby slipped into the room, carrying a ragged encyclopedia about dinosaurs. His thin fingers fidgeted nervously with the corners of the pages, a sure sign of a restless night. Another nightmare? I asked, though the answer was obvious. He nodded, crawling under my side. Toby looked younger for his 10 years, frail, with big brown eyes that seemed to see through the world and sometimes found it too much to handle. Diplodocus lived 84 million years ago, he began his familiar mantra. They were herbivores. Their necks were up to 6 meters long. I stroked his unruly hair as he recited facts about ancient animals. It soothed him after his nightmares, immersing him in a world of ordered, unchanging knowledge, a world where all the rules are known and nothing happens unexpectedly. 3 years ago, when Toby was diagnosed with autism, I moved into my son's home in Santa Rosa. Temporarily, we all thought. Hugh and Darla were at a loss, and I, recently widowed, offered to help until they adjusted. My help went from temporary to permanent. I remained living in the small guest room, even though my own home was only 20 minutes away. Grandma, why do people disappear? Toby suddenly asked, interrupting my recitation of facts about the Mesozoic era. What do you mean, honey? Daddy said he's about to disappear for 3 weeks. People can't disappear. It's physically impossible. Matter can't just disappear. I sighed. So Hugh had decided to take this trip he'd been talking about for the past 2 weeks after all, without consulting me, and apparently without thinking about how to explain it to his son. Dad meant he's going on a trip. He's not really going to disappear. Toby frowned. Are you going to disappear with me? No, sweetie, I'll be with you. I hugged him tighter, feeling his tense shoulders relax a little. By the time the morning sun began to shine through the curtains, Toby was dozing off, holding the book to his chest. I gently disentangled myself and began to get ready for the day. Our mornings always started the same way. First breakfast for Toby, oatmeal with just the right amount of raisins, then checking his school bag, and only then coffee for the adults. When I went down to the kitchen, I found Darla there, which was unusual. She was usually still asleep at this time. You're early, I remarked, pulling out a pot of oatmeal. Darla, a petite woman with a perpetually tired look, wrinkled her nose. I couldn't sleep. Hugh snored all night. She sipped her coffee. Did Toby come to see you again? I heard him pattering down the hall. Yeah, he had a nightmare. We agreed he'd learn to cope on his own. She sounded annoyed. Dr. Patterson said he needed to develop independence. I remained silent, measuring my cereal. Dr. Patterson also said that Toby needed consistency, routine, and emotional support, but that part of the advice Darla and Hugh preferred to ignore. Did you hear about our trip? Darla asked, changing the subject. 3 weeks in Hawaii. Hugh is finally using his vacation. He mentioned something, I answered discreetly. What about Toby? School's not over yet, is it? Darla shrugged with feigned nonchalance. We thought you'd look after him. You've been taking care of him all day anyway. I felt the familiar irritation rising inside me, but I held it back. In 3 years, I'd learned to swallow comments like that. After all, I was here for Toby. You should have discussed this with me beforehand, I said as calmly as I could. And Toby, too. He already knows, and he's worried. Darla rolled her eyes. He's always worried. No matter what we do, he'll find a reason to panic. At that moment, Hugh, my only son, entered the kitchen. A tall man with thinning hair and a perpetually tense jawline. In recent years, I'd noticed more and more how little of the open, laughing boy I'd raised was left in him. "Good morning," he murmured, heading straight for the coffee maker. "Is Toby up yet?" "He's in my room," I answered. "He had a nightmare, and he knows about your trip." Hugh sighed, exchanging a quick glance with Darla. We were going to tell him later, when the details were clear. "He needs time to prepare for the change," I reminded him. "You know how hard it is for him to break the routine." "Mama, we know that," Hugh replied sharply. "You don't need to lecture us every time we have to raise our own son." I remained silent, concentrating on making breakfast. It had become part of our routine, too, Hugh and Darla making decisions without consulting me, and then getting annoyed when I pointed out their implications for Toby. Breakfast passed in tense silence. Toby came down when the oatmeal was ready and ate in silence, glancing at his parents occasionally. He could always sense the tension, even when he didn't understand the reasons for it. After Hugh and Darla left for work and Toby headed off to school with the aide, I was finally able to exhale. The house was empty, and I decided to take advantage of the free time to drive into my own house. My car, an old blue Ford bought while my husband was still alive, started on the third try. On the way, I thought about how strange my life had turned out. At 67, I wasn't living in my own house, effectively acting as a 24-hour nanny, while my own home, a small but cozy cottage on a quiet street, brought me rental income. Ellis and Tamsin Reeves had rented it 3 years ago, shortly after I moved in with Hugh. A young couple of doctors with a young son, they were the perfect tenants, punctual with payment, neat and respectful. Their son Jamie was the same age as Toby, but such an opposite to my grandson that it sometimes pained me to watch the energetic, outgoing boy who easily did things that were insurmountable for Toby. As I approached the house, I noticed Tamsin watering the flowers in the garden. She waved at me with a smile. "Mer, what a pleasant surprise. We weren't expecting you until next week." I smiled back as I climbed out of the car. "I had a free moment, so I thought I'd check on you." Tamsin, a 35-year-old woman with curly hair pulled back into a casual bun, put down her watering can. "We're fine. Ellis is on duty, and Jamie's at school. Would you like some tea?" I was just about to take a break. We set up on the veranda that Ellis had renovated last year. Sitting in the wicker chair with a cup of tea in my hands, I felt a strange sense of being a guest in my own home. But it wasn't bitter. On the contrary, it was nice to see how well the Reeves family fit into the space, how well they cared for it. "How's Toby?" Tamsin asked, interrupting my thoughts. "It's been a rough few days." I sighed, sipping my tea. "His parents are planning a 3-week trip, and he's already anxious." Tamsin frowned. "In the middle of the school year? And who's going to be with him?" "Me, of course," I shrugged. "The usual." "Mer." She paused, searching for words. "Forgive me for being blunt, but don't you think your son and his wife expect too much of you?" I felt my shoulders tense. "Toby's my grandson. I'm doing this for him." "I understand that. It's just—" She hesitated again. "As a pediatrician who works with special children, I see a lot of burned-out caregivers, and you're starting to look like that." I looked away, unwilling to acknowledge the truth of what she was saying. Tamsin, apparently sensing my embarrassment, changed the subject. "By the way, I was wondering, do you have any plans for the house next year? Ellis and I were thinking about renewing the lease." I shook my head. "There's no change. You can stay as long as you want." Though actually, lately I'd been thinking more and more about coming back, especially at times like today, when my home seemed like an oasis of calm compared to the constant tension at Hugh's house. But every time that thought crossed my mind, I remembered Toby, his vulnerability and need for stability, and realized I couldn't leave. On the way back to my son's house, I stopped at the supermarket. As I wandered between the aisles, I absent-mindedly made a list of the foods Toby loves, mentally planned the weekly menu, thought about remembering to pick up his medications from the pharmacy. My life revolved around his needs and schedule. Back at Hugh's house, I found a message from the school on my answering machine. Toby had had another breakdown in math class. He had been sent to the sensory room and had calmed down, but the school was asking for someone to come in tomorrow to meet with the counselor. I knew Hugh had an important meeting tomorrow and Darla had a shift she couldn't miss. So I'd go. That evening, as I was making dinner, I watched Toby sitting in the living room with a tablet. He was watching a documentary about space, one of his many passions. His face was calm and centered. At times like this, he seemed like a perfectly normal kid, and only his tense, straight back and slight sway gave away his features. The door slammed and Hugh entered the house, followed by Darla. Both looked tired and irritated. Darla went straight upstairs, tossing her bag on the couch, and Hugh headed for the kitchen. The school called, I reported, stirring the sauce. Toby had a breakdown. He needs to see a counselor tomorrow. Hugh groaned, opening the refrigerator. Again? What is it this time? They didn't give any details. But I'll go, don't worry. He looked at me with ill-concealed relief. Thanks, Mom. There's an important meeting tomorrow, and I can't miss it. I nodded, not saying what was on my tongue. That it was important to his son, too. That I'd been to all the school meetings, doctor and therapist appointments over the past year, while he'd found excuses not to attend. Dinner went through the usual routine. Darla talked about a difficult customer at the call center. Hugh complained about the new inspector. Toby methodically divided the food on his plate, creating neat sections that didn't overlap. I ate in silence, inserting the occasional brief comment to maintain a semblance of general conversation. After dinner, when Toby was already in bed and his parents were settled in front of the TV, I went up to my room and pulled out the photo album. Flipping through the pages of pictures of Hugh as a child smiling, open-mouthed, I tried to understand at what point my son had turned into this irritable, disgruntled man who seemed to see his own child as a burden, and why I, knowing how he felt about Toby, continued to stay here, letting him and Darla push all the responsibility onto me, not recognizing my contribution and constantly devaluing my efforts. The answer was simple and painful at the same time. I was afraid that without me, Toby would be left alone with parents who did not understand his needs and were unwilling to adapt to his peculiarities. And this fear was stronger than my desire to return to my own home, stronger than the accumulated fatigue and resentment. As I fell asleep, I thought of Tamsin, of her concerned look and direct words about burnout. Maybe she was right. Maybe I really did take on too much. But what could I do? Back down and leave Toby? It was unthinkable. Tomorrow would be another day, another meeting at school, another attempt to explain to Hugh and Darla what their son needed, and I would go on because there was simply no alternative. My day started at 5:30 in the morning, an hour and a half before Toby would open his eyes. It was my only truly private time, when I could drink a cup of tea in silence and mentally prepare myself for the day ahead. There was a lot to do today. A meeting at school, preparing a special lunch for Toby, his sensory integration exercises, and a dozen other small but important things that formed the basis of his stable existence. At 7 sharp, I knocked on the door of his room, always 3 times, at the same intervals. Such details were critical to Toby. "Good morning, sunshine. Time to get up." Toby opened his eyes instantly, as if he hadn't slept at all. He always woke up like that, going from full rest to full wakefulness in a second. "It's Wednesday," he said. "Wednesday is oatmeal with cinnamon and an apple cut into 1-inch cubes." I smiled. His memory always amazed me. "That's right. And you have math, history, and science today. He nodded, satisfied that the schedule was confirmed, and began his morning ritual. Every movement was calibrated and repeated from day to day in the same sequence. Get up on the right side of the bed, fold his pajamas 4 times, pull out the clothes laid out the night before in strict order. While Toby got dressed, I went down to make breakfast. Hugh was already in the kitchen, which surprised me. He was usually up later. Can't sleep? I asked, pulling out a pot. Hugh, with circles under his eyes, nodded. I had a headache in the middle of the night. I decided to get up rather than just lie there. I took the medicine out of the cabinet and silently handed it to him. Over the years we'd lived together, we'd developed our own system of communication. Minimum words, maximum actions. Lately, though, even that system was starting to break down. Mom, Hugh twirled the pill in his hands, hesitant to swallow it. Darla and I have been thinking about Toby in school. I froze, distracted from slicing apples. Conversations that started with Darla and I were thinking rarely ended well. What about? Should we consider a specialized school? The regular one clearly couldn't handle his peculiarities. I put the knife down carefully. We've already discussed this. Integration is important for his development. Dr. Stevens said, I know what he said, Hugh interrupted, but that was 2 years ago. Maybe things have changed now. It hasn't, I said firmly. Toby needs stability, not more upheaval. Right now, he has an individual aid, an adapted program, an understanding teacher. Transferring to a new school would set him back months. Hugh sighed with ill-concealed irritation. We're just tired of the constant calls from the school, the endless meetings with counselors and social workers. It's exhausting, Mom. I held back the harsh answer that was ready to roll off my tongue. That they hardly participate in these meetings, that all the exhausting responsibilities have long been on my shoulders. Instead, I simply said, we'll talk about it after today's meeting. Perhaps the psychologist will have some new ideas. The rest of the day unfolded as usual. Breakfast for Toby, exactly to his specifications. Backpack check. All the items had to be in a certain order, or he'd have an anxiety attack. Then a 15-minute drive to school, during which I listed out the daily routine. This calmed him down before immersing him in the complex world of school, full of unpredictable social interactions. After I handed Toby over to his aide, Nick, I didn't go straight home as I usually do. Instead, I went to the office of the school counselor, a short woman named Lorraine, with whom we interacted more often than I would have liked. Mira, thank you for coming. Lorraine gestured for me to sit down. Toby's parents couldn't make it? They had work, I answered neutrally, not wanting to go into details. Lorraine nodded, and I could tell by the look in her eyes that she wasn't surprised. She opened a folder of papers. Yesterday's incident wasn't serious. I just wanted to talk about the general dynamics. Toby is showing progress in some areas, but his anxiety seems to have increased in recent weeks. I sighed. The situation at home is tense. His parents are planning a long trip, and the news of this has caused Toby to be anxious. Lorraine frowned. A long trip for how long? 3 weeks. She shook her head. It's difficult for any child, and Toby especially. It will be important to prepare him, to create a clear schedule for this period, perhaps with visual cues. Will you be with him the whole time? Yes, of course, I replied. That's good. Your presence is a major stabilizing factor in his life. She paused. Can I ask you a personal question, Mira? How are you coping with all this yourself? I was caught off guard. Usually our conversations always revolved around Toby. Yeah, coping, I answered uncertainly. It's my family, my grandson. I understand that, but caring for a child with special needs is a marathon, not a sprint. And it can be important to delegate some of the responsibility to avoid burnout. She handed me a brochure. Here's information about a support group for family members of children with autism. They meet once a week. Maybe you should try it. I took the brochure, doubting that I would ever use it. Where would I find the time for such meetings? But I thanked Lorraine and promised to think about it. After the meeting, I stopped by the pharmacy to pick up some medication for Toby, then to the specialty store for gluten-free foods that were part of his diet, then to the library to pick up books about space, his new hobby. Each step I took was part of a larger support system I had built around my grandson. When I got home, I found a message on my answering machine from Tamsin. She was asking if I could stop by in the next few days. They had some issues with the house. I called back and arranged to meet tomorrow while Toby was at school. The rest of the day flew by with the usual chores. I made lunch for Toby, picked him up from school, gave him breathing exercises to help with his anxiety, and helped him with his homework, making sure each step was done exactly as he needed it. By evening, when Hugh and Darla returned, I was feeling the usual tiredness, but also satisfaction. The day had gone relatively smoothly, with no major breakdowns. At dinner, Darla announced that all the formalities for their trip were settled. "We leave in 2 weeks," she said, avoiding Toby's eyes. "We'll be back just in time for the end of the quarter." Toby froze with his fork in his hand. "That's 14 days, he said. "I have a math test in 14 days. "You'll do fine, champ," Hugh said. "You're a genius with numbers." "I'll get you ready for the test," I said, seeing Toby's shoulders tense. "We'll have a special study schedule, okay?" He nodded, calming down a little, but I could see that the news still threw him off balance. After dinner, I helped him shower, another routine with many unchanging steps, and put him to bed after reading exactly 2 pages from a book about stars, no more, no less. When Toby finally fell asleep, I went down to the living room where Hugh and Darla were discussing the details of the upcoming trip. "Mom, you're sure you're going to be okay, right?" Hugh asked, noticing me. "We'd take Toby with us, but you know what? It would be a disaster." I nodded curtly. "Of course I can manage. Just please, let's create a clear plan for him for these 3 weeks." Lorraine suggested making a visual schedule today. Darla rolled her eyes. "Mira, you're making this way too complicated. Toby can survive a couple weeks without us. After all, you're doing most of the work of taking care of him anyway." I remained silent, though I was seething inside at the unfairness of those words. Did they really not realize how important stability was to their son? Or did they just not want to understand because it required effort on their part? The next morning, after dropping Toby off at school, I headed toward my house. Tamsin met me on the doorstep, smiling welcomingly. "Thank you for stopping by. Ellis is home. He was on night duty last night. He's sleeping it off now." We went into the kitchen where Tamsin poured us some tea. "Actually, the question about the house was just an excuse," she admitted. "I wanted to talk to you about something else. I was wary." "About what?" "About your grandson." Tamsin paused. "Yesterday, Ellis casually mentioned that you have a grandson with autism. I didn't think much of it at first, but then I remembered you talking about him. Mira, why didn't you ever say you worked with children with special needs?" I blinked in surprise. "Because I don't work with them. I mean, I take care of Toby, but it's not a job, it's—" "I understand," she interrupted softly. "But I mean, I work with kids like that too. It's my specialty, neurodevelopmental disabilities and autism in particular." I froze, cup in hand. "Yeah, I didn't know. I thought you were just a pediatrician." Tamsin shook her head. "I run the neurodevelopmental unit at the pediatric clinic. We work specifically with children with autism, ADHD, and other disabilities. This discovery struck a chord with me. For 3 years, I've been renting my house to this woman, and I didn't even know what she did. That's why I wanted to talk, Tamsin continued. If your grandson needs professional support, I could help, or at least some good specialists. We have doctors, I answered uncertainly, and therapists. Of course, she nodded, but sometimes a fresh set of eyes can't hurt, especially if there are problems with integration into the regular school. How do you know about school? I wondered. Just a guess based on experience. Tamsin smiled. Most children with autism have difficulties in a regular educational environment. It's often not about their learning abilities, but about the way the process is organized. At that moment, Ellis entered the kitchen, a tall man with kind eyes and a slight gray in his dark hair. He gave me a friendly nod. Mur, it's good to see you. I was telling you about my work, Tamsin explained to her husband, and that I could help with her grandson. That's a great idea. Ellis poured himself a cup of coffee. Tamsin's an amazing professional. Parents from all over the state bring their kids to her. I sat stunned by this new information. All these years, there was someone who could help Toby, and I didn't even know it. And your son, Jamie, is he too? I didn't finish the question, but Tamsin understood. No, Jamie doesn't have autism, but he grew up around kids with special needs. I used to take him to work, to our support groups. He's very open and friendly with kids who are different from him. At that moment, as if on cue, Jamie, an energetic boy with the same curly hair as his mother, burst into the kitchen. His backpack dangled behind his back. Mom, I'm ready. He spotted me and smiled broadly. Hello, Mrs. Baird. How are you doing? Fine, thank you, Jamie. I smiled back. His enthusiasm was contagious. You have a grandson my age, don't you? He asked. Mom told me. Why doesn't he ever come with you? We could play. I looked at Tamsin confused, not knowing how to explain to the child the complexities of Toby's autism. Mira's grandson is special, Tamsin said softly. He may have difficulty in new situations and with new people. How is Lucas at your clinic? Jamie asked understandingly. The one who always wears headphones and knows everything about trains? Something like that. Tamsin nodded. Cool. Jamie turned to me. Lucas is a friend of mine. He wouldn't talk to me at first, but then I learned the train schedule and now we chat about it. Does your grandson like anything too? Space, I answered, touched by his genuine interest. Stars, planets, things like that. I love space too, Jamie exclaimed excitedly. I have a telescope my dad gave me for my birthday. Maybe your grandson could come and look through it. You can see Jupiter just fine right now. Tamsin put her hand on her son's shoulder. Let's not be in a hurry, okay? Mira needs to think things over first. As Tamsin took Jamie off to get ready for school, Ellis sat down across from me. You know, Mira, I understand how it is. The family dynamics, the sense of duty. But sometimes the best support comes from the outside. Tamsin could really help your grandson if you'll allow it. I nodded, feeling new thoughts and possibilities swarming in my head. I'll think about it. I really would. On the way home, I couldn't shake the image of Jamie so open, so friendly, so different from the withdrawn Toby. And for the first time in a long time, I let myself think, what if Toby really would be better off in a different environment? What if he could open up differently around people like Tamsin and her family? But that thought immediately triggered a feeling of guilt. How could I even think of alienating my grandson from his parents? Despite all their faults, Hugh was my son and Toby was his child. It was my duty to support their family, not destroy it. That evening, while helping Toby with his homework, I watched him with renewed attention. His concentrated face, his slender fingers, the neatness of his numbers, the occasional slight sway. It was all so familiar, so familiar. And at the same time, I couldn't help thinking of Jamie, his enthusiasm and openness to the world. Could they be friends? Could Toby find in him what he'd been missing? A friend who understood his peculiarities? When Hugh and Darla returned from work, I noticed they were whispering about something, sneaking glances at me. Finally, Hugh walked over, rubbing his hands together nervously. "Mother, we need to talk. About the trip." I tensed, sensing something wrong. "About what?" Darla and I were thinking. Maybe we should take Toby with us. He sounded unsure, like he didn't believe what he was saying. "With you?" I asked, surprised by this sudden change. "But you said yourself that it would be a disaster." "Yes, but—" He hesitated, glancing at Darla. "We don't want to burden you. You already do so much for us." I looked at Toby, who didn't seem to hear the conversation, immersed in his book. But I knew him well enough to notice the slight tension in his shoulders he'd heard and understood. "Hugh," I said quietly, "do you really think Toby can handle the flight? The change of time zones? The new place full of strangers and unpredictable situations?" He sighed, admitting defeat. "No, but we wanted to at least suggest it." "I appreciate that. But Toby would be better off here, in familiar surroundings, with an established routine." Later, when Toby was already asleep and Hugh and Darla had retired to their room, I sat in the kitchen, reflecting on today's discoveries. The idea that there was a specialist who might be able to help Toby living just around the corner kept me awake, as did the idea that maybe what he needed was not only my protection from his parents' misunderstanding, but a chance to find his place in a world that accepted him for who he was. For the first time in a long time, I allowed myself to wonder, maybe we all, Toby and I, and even Hugh and Darla, needed change more than we needed to maintain the familiar but dysfunctional status quo. I went through the contents of my closet, trying to decide what to wear. It was unaccustomed to thinking about my clothes. Usually, I only cared about keeping things clean and comfortable, since I spent most of the day at home with Toby or doing chores. But tonight was a special occasion. Dinner at a restaurant, what Hugh called a belated birthday celebration. My birthday had been almost a month ago, and I didn't even expect anyone to remember it. Hugh and Darla were busy that day, and Toby presented me with a homemade card with constellations drawn on it, a joint project with his school therapist. It was the only gift I'd ever gotten, and I treasured it more than anything. So when Hugh announced 3 days ago that he and Darla had decided to finally celebrate my birthday at a restaurant, I was surprised, especially considering they'd included Toby in the plans, which was extremely rare. Usually all family outings happened without him because his behavior could be unpredictable. I opted for a navy blue long-sleeve dress, simple but elegant. A friend had given it to me a few years ago, and I'd only worn it a couple times. Brushing my gray hair, I caught my reflection in the mirror. When had I gotten so old? The wrinkles around my eyes had deepened, and a permanent tiredness had settled into my gaze. At 67, I looked 75, the result of 3 years of stress and sleep deprivation. With a sigh, I put down my comb and left the room. Downstairs, Hugh was pacing nervously in the living room, glancing at his watch. "Finally," he grumbled. "We're late. Is Toby ready yet?" "He's changing," I said. "You know he needs time to get ready to go out in public." Hugh snorted. "I hope he doesn't have any tantrums tonight." I didn't say anything. My son still refused to admit that what he called tantrums were actually sensory overload. Toby's reaction to too bright lights, loud noises, or crowds of people. It wasn't crankiness or disobedience. It was a physiological reaction that Toby had no control over. "I gave him clear instructions," Hugh continued. "No antics in the restaurant. We made a reservation a week ago, and I'm not going to embarrass myself. I held back again, though I was seething inside. How could I talk about my own child like that? As if his peculiarities were just a whim or a way to ruin his parents' evening? Darla came down the stairs in a tight red dress and bright makeup. She made me feel even older and unattractive. "Is everyone ready?" she asked. "I hope the restaurant is worth the money. I'd read great reviews about it." Finally, Toby joined us, dressed in his dress clothes, dark pants, and a light blue shirt. He looked tense, but he was doing well. I knew he was trying for me. "Looking good, champ." Hugh patted him on the shoulder, and I saw Toby flinch slightly at the touch. "Ready to go to a real grown-up restaurant?" "I've made a plan," Toby replied seriously. "I'm going to sit quietly. I won't sway. If it gets too loud, I'll squeeze my hands under the table instead of covering my ears." My heart squeezed. My little boy had made a whole strategy on how to disguise his peculiarities so as not to embarrass his parents. It had once been called good behavior. Now I knew it was daily, grueling work for him, trying to fit into a world that wasn't made for people like him. The restaurant was noisier than I expected, a fancy place with dim lighting, loud background music, and tables spaced pretty close together. Not the most appropriate environment for Toby, and I could see him clenching his fists under the table, trying to deal with the sensory load. I sat down next to him, quietly placing my hand on his shoulder, a silent reminder that I was here, that he wasn't alone. Hugh and Darla seemed oblivious to his discomfort, immersed in studying the menu. "Everything here is so expensive," Darla murmured, wincing at the prices. "But I think we can afford to relax a little, don't you, dear?" Hugh nodded, though I could see that he paled slightly as he looked at the numbers. "Of course, today's a special day." He looked at me with a strained smile. "It's not every day my mom has a birthday." The waiter took our order. Toby chose the simplest dish, pasta with butter, no sauce or spices. Fortunately, the restaurant had agreed to make it especially for him, even though it wasn't on the menu. When the appetizers arrived, I noticed Hugh and Darla exchanging glances, as if preparing for something. Finally, Hugh cleared his throat. "So, Mom, we have news. Good news." "Yeah?" I took a sip of water, preparing myself for anything. "Darla and I are going to Hawaii after all." He smiled. "We're all set. Tickets are purchased. We leave in 10 days. I froze, trying to digest the information. They'd been talking about this trip for weeks, but I thought it was just talk, especially since Hugh had recently mentioned the possibility of taking Toby with him. "And what about Toby?" I asked, even though I already knew the answer. Hugh and Darla exchanged glances again. "Well, we thought you'd look after him as usual," Darla said, as if it was the most natural thing in the world. "It's only for 3 weeks. Besides, you said yourself that he needs stability, and flying in a new place will only upset him." I felt Toby tense up next to me. His fingers began tapping rapidly on his knee, a sure sign of growing anxiety. "Don't you think you should have discussed this with me beforehand?" I asked, trying to speak calmly. "Before you bought the tickets?" Hugh frowned. "We've been discussing this for weeks. You knew we were planning the trip." "Planning and buying tickets are different things, Hugh. 3 weeks is a long time. What if something happens? What if Toby gets sick or has a breakdown that I can't handle alone?" "Mom," Hugh lowered his voice, leaning across the table to me. "You've been handling him practically alone for the last 3 years. We deserve a little vacation, and it's non-negotiable. The tickets have already been purchased and are non-refundable." I looked at Toby, who was now swaying almost imperceptibly, his eyes wide open and staring at one point. He was trying to abstract himself from a situation that was becoming increasingly tense. "It's not about whether or not I can handle it." I said quietly. This is about you making decisions that affect the whole family without consulting me or Toby. Oh my God, Mur, Darla sighed. You're being dramatic. It's just a vacation. The waiter brought the main courses, and the conversation stopped for a while. I tried to calm down, reminding myself that a scene in a public place would only add to Toby's stress. But the sense of injustice wouldn't let me go. When dinner was over, Hugh started talking again, this time about their travel plans, about the beaches, excursions, and restaurants they were going to visit. I listened half-heartedly, thinking about how to organize these 3 weeks for Toby. I would need to make a clear schedule, prepare him for his parents' absence, maybe even create a countdown calendar. Mom, are you listening to me? Hugh's voice brought me back to reality. Sorry, I was thinking. I tried to smile. What were you saying? I was asking what you think about Toby missing the last week of the quarter. We'll be back just a couple days before it ends, and I was thinking maybe he doesn't have to go to school those 2 days. I looked at him in surprise, but he has a math test on the penultimate day. He's been studying for it for weeks. I'm sure the teachers will be sympathetic. Hugh, you know how important routine is to him and how hard it is for him to change his schedule. Missing a test he's been studying for? Jesus, Mom, he interrupted, irritation rising in his voice. Why do you always have to make everything so complicated? It's just a school test. It's not the end of the world. It's important to Toby. I instinctively put my hand on my grandson's shoulder, feeling him start to tremble. And what's important to me is important to him. Hugh snorted, leaning back in his chair. Typical, always his needs above all others, as if no one else in this family is entitled to their own desires. That's not what I meant. No, that's exactly what I meant, Darla interrupted. Ever since you moved in, it's always been about Toby and his special needs. What about our needs? We deserve a little normalcy, too. I felt anger boiling up inside, a rare emotion for me, used to always giving in and smoothing things over. A normal life? I questioned. What exactly do you mean by a normal life, Darla? A life without responsibility for your own child? Because, I'm sorry, but that's what you've both been trying to get for the last 3 years by shifting everything onto me. Hugh's face turned purple. How dare you? After everything we've done for you, provided a roof over your head when you could have been living alone in your house? I moved in with you to help with Toby, I reminded him, trying to stay calm, though I was trembling inside. You asked me to, and since then, I've basically become his primary caregiver while you two live like you don't have a special needs child. Toby was swaying visibly now, his eyes tightly closed and his hands clasped over his ears. I tried to hug him, whispering words of comfort, but the situation was already spiraling out of control. At that moment, the waiter came over with the bill. He placed the leather folder on the table, and Hugh immediately grabbed it, opened it, and turned white when he saw the amount. Shit, he muttered, then turned to me. Mom, why don't you pay for it? It's your birthday after all, and we have all the money for tickets right now. I stared at my son incredulously. You invite me to my birthday dinner and then ask me to pay for it? Come on, he smiled strainedly. It's just a formality. Who cares who's paying? We're family. If I knew I had to pay, I'd choose a cheaper place, I said. My fixed income doesn't pay for restaurants like this, Hugh. Darla rolled her eyes. Don't be so greedy. You have money from renting out the house, and you spend next to nothing living with us. I'm not the person who should be paying for this dinner. I was adamant, though deep down I knew it would only exacerbate the conflict. You invited me as the birthday girl. Hugh's face contorted with rage. He leaned across the table toward me. Damn it, Mom. Things always have to be your way, don't they? You can never just help when you're asked. I noticed a few customers at neighboring tables turn in our direction. Toby was moaning quietly now, sinking into a full-blown breakdown. Hugh, please. I tried to speak softly. You're scaring Toby. Let's just split the bill and go home. No! He slammed his fist on the table, making the dishes bounce. You always do this. You always use it to avoid responsibility or to make us feel like bad parents. Hugh, please calm down. I felt a lump come up in my throat. People are watching. I don't care about people. He was practically shouting now. You're going to pay for this bloody dinner, or I swear. What? I suddenly felt a surge of courage. What will you do, Hugh? It all happened so fast I hardly had time to realize it. Hugh sprang to his feet, his hand flew up, and I felt a searing pain on my cheek. The sound of the slap echoed through the suddenly quiet restaurant. I froze with my hand against my burning cheek, unable to believe that my own son had hit me. Toby was sobbing openly now, rocking back and forth. Pay the goddamn bill, Hugh hissed, looming over me. Old lady, pay it and don't embarrass us, or we'll throw you out of the house, Darla shouted, her face contorted with anger. At that moment, something unexpected happened. A woman from a neighboring table stood up and walked toward us. With shock, I recognized Tamsin, and behind her, Ellis stood up as well. They both looked at us with concern and determination. I apologize for the intrusion. Tamsin's voice was professionally calm. But I'm a doctor, and I think this woman needs medical attention. Hugh turned around, his face still contorted with anger. This is none of your business. It's a family matter. A punch in the face is not a family matter, Ellis replied firmly, standing up beside his wife. It's violence, and as a doctor, I insist on seeing the victim. Who the hell are you people? Hugh clenched his fists. We're your mother's lodgers, Tamsin replied calmly, and we happened to witness you hitting her. Mira, she turned to me, I'd like to examine your cheek. The blow was quite severe, and there may be tissue damage. I sat there dazed, not knowing what to say or do. Toby continued to cry, and it brought me back to reality. I hugged him, trying to comfort him. Please, I whispered, looking at Tamsin. Help Toby first. He's in sensory overload. Tamsin nodded, understanding the situation immediately. She leaned over to Toby and spoke in a quiet, even voice. Hello, Toby. My name is Tamsin. I'm a doctor, and I work with children who, like you, sometimes have trouble dealing with bright sounds and lights. Can I sit next to you? To my surprise, Toby nodded slightly, still rocking. Tamsin carefully sat down next to him, not trying to touch him, but creating a barrier between him and the rest of the restaurant with her presence. Now I'm going to ask my husband to pay for our table, and then we'll all go outside together where it's quieter. How's that for a plan? Toby nodded again, his sobs beginning to subside, though his breathing was still ragged. Hugh stood, clenching and unclenching his fists, his face shifting from rage to embarrassment and back again. Darla sat with her arms crossed over her chest, her lips pressed into a thin line. You have no right to interfere, Hugh hissed. This is our family, our problems. When I see violence and a child in distress, I have not only the right, but a professional obligation to intervene, Tamsin replied calmly. Mira, are you ready to come with us? We'll walk you home. To your home. She emphasized the word your. I looked at my son, at the woman he'd chosen to marry, at their angry faces, then at Toby, who was beginning to calm down a little under Tamsin's protective wing, and finally at my lodgers offering me a rescue I hadn't expected. At that moment, the restaurant manager approached the table, attracted by the commotion. Is everything all right? He asked, shifting his gaze from one to the other. We've had complaints from other diners. No, it's not all right, Ellis answered before any of us could open our mouths. This man hit his elderly mother, and the child is under a lot of stress. My wife, the pediatrician, is trying to provide help. The manager has gone pale. Should I call the police? No, Hugh blurted out. There's no need. We were just leaving. Here, he pulled out a credit card and tossed it on the table. Here's to everyone. I stood up slowly, still stunned by what had happened. My cheek burned, but even more painful was the wound in my heart. My own son had hit me, publicly humiliated me, and his wife threatened to kick me out of the house if I didn't comply. Come on, Mira, Tamsin said softly, helping Toby up. We'll take you home and check your cheek. Then we'll decide what to do next. I nodded, feeling strangely numb. Everything seemed unreal, as if I were watching from a distance. Tamsin was leading Toby toward the exit, and Ellis was walking beside me, ready to support me if I needed it. Mom, Hugh called out to me as we reached the door. Where are you going? What about Toby? I turned around, meeting his gaze. Toby's coming with me. My voice sounded surprisingly firm. To our house. But you can't just take him. Darla was outraged. He's our son. A son you've both conveniently forgotten, I said. Don't worry, we'll soon find out what happens next. With those words, I let Ellis lead me out of the restaurant, leaving Hugh and Darla surrounded by the judgmental stares of the other diners. Outside in the cool evening air, I was finally able to take a deep breath. Tamsin was talking quietly to Toby, sitting with him on a bench not far from the restaurant's entrance. He had stopped crying, though he was still swaying slightly. How are you? Ellis asked, looking closely at my cheek. It looks sore. You should put something cold on it. I'm fine, I answered automatically, though it was far from the truth. Mira, he touched my shoulder gently. What happened back there? It's unacceptable. No one has the right to raise a hand against you, not under any circumstances. I nodded, feeling the tears I'd been holding back for so long come to my eyes. I know, but what do I do? Where do I go? I don't have. You have a home, Ellis said firmly. Your own home, and Tamsin and I will help you get back there. With Toby. But how? They're his parents. I don't have any rights. We'll figure something out. He smiled encouragingly. For now, let's get you home and take care of your cheek. We'll figure out the rest tomorrow. Tamsin led Toby over to us, who already looked calmer, although his eyes were red from crying. Grandma, he reached for my hand. Does your face hurt? Daddy shouldn't have hit you. It wasn't right. It's gonna be okay, sweetie. I hugged him, feeling him snuggle up to me trustingly. Now we'll go to my house, and you'll see where I used to live. It's quiet and peaceful. He nodded, not asking any questions. As always, Toby just trusted me, relying on me to do what was best for him. As we got into Ellis's car, a spacious family car with comfortable seats, I felt a strange mixture of fear and relief. Everything changed in an instant. My cheeks still burned from the slap, but along with the physical pain came an unexpected release. I could no longer, nor did I want to, go on living my life as before. You're absolutely right. It's my mistake. The plan calls for the house to be 2 stories, so that the Reeves family could live on the second floor and Mira and Toby on the first floor. Let's fix the chapter by following all the requirements. The drive to my house took only 20 minutes, but in that time, everything changed. There was silence in Ellis's car, a saving silence after the noisy restaurant and the conflict that had occurred. Toby was sitting next to me in the back seat, still shaking slightly, but calmer. Tamsin, who sat in the front, turned around from time to time, watching us with professional attention. When we pulled up to my house, a 2-story cottage with a neat front garden, I felt a strange excitement. This was my place, my home, which I had not lived in fully for 3 years. I had only visited it from time to settle some household matters with the tenants. Here we are, Tamsin said softly as she got out of the car. Toby, do you like your grandmother's house? Toby looked at the building carefully, as if trying to evaluate it by some criteria of his own. It's quiet, he said at last. And not too many people. That's good. I smiled, despite the pain in my cheek. Toby had immediately identified the main advantage: silence. Hugh and Darla's house was always noisy. The TV was always on. Guests came over often. Darla talked loudly and sharply. But here, on a quiet street, surrounded by old trees, even the air seemed different, calm. Ellis opened the door with his key and let us in. Make yourselves comfortable. I'll get some ice for your cheek. Inside, the house didn't look quite as I remembered it. The Reeves family had made changes, new curtains, a different arrangement of furniture, children's drawings on the walls. But all in all, it was still my house, with its familiar creaking floorboards and the distinctive smell of old wood. Toby walked cautiously into the living room, scrutinizing every detail. There are a lot of books here, he remarked, pointing to the filled bookshelves. Do you like to read, Grandma? Yes, dear. I sank gratefully into the chair, feeling suddenly tired. I used to read every night. Why did you stop? His direct question caught me off guard. Why did I stop? Because there was no room in Hugh's house for my books? Or because all my time and energy was spent taking care of Toby and doing housework? I guess I didn't have enough time, I answered evasively. But now I might start again. Tamsin came back from the kitchen, carrying a tray with cups of tea and a bag of frozen peas wrapped in a kitchen towel. Here, put this on your cheek. She handed me the homemade compress. It'll help with the swelling and the pain. And this is for Toby. She placed a cup of warm milk in front of the boy. I hope you like it with cinnamon. Toby nodded, carefully wrapping both hands around the cup, his usual way of controlling things so as not to spill the contents. Ellis joined us, carrying a small first aid kit. I'd like to examine your cheek if you don't mind, he said. I'm a neurologist, but I can do a basic assessment. I nodded, letting him gently touch the reddened skin. His touch was careful and professional, but I flinched not from the pain, but from the unfamiliarity of such attention. There's no serious damage, Ellis concluded after his examination. But there will be a bruise, and maybe a little swelling for a couple days. It doesn't matter. I tried to smile, though my lips trembled. The important thing is that Toby's okay. Tamsin and Ellis exchanged looks of concern. Myrrh. Tamsin sat down on the couch next to Toby. I realize this isn't the best time for a serious conversation, but we need to talk about what to do next. You can't go back to your son's house after what happened. I sighed, pressing the cold compress to my cheek. I know, but what am I supposed to do with Toby? I can't just take him away. I don't have legal rights. Actually, Ellis interjected, in cases of proven domestic violence, a grandmother can get temporary custody of her grandchild, especially if there are witnesses to the incident. And we do, Tamsin and I, the restaurant staff, other customers. Violence? I cringed at that word. It was a slap in the face. Hugh had never before. Myrrh, Tamsin interrupted me firmly. A slap is physical violence. Threatening to kick you out of the house is emotional abuse. Don't minimize what happened. I lowered my eyes, not knowing what to say. Part of me still wanted to defend Hugh, to justify what he'd done as stress or a moment of weakness. But the other part of me realized that Tamsin was right, that what had happened in the restaurant was unacceptable, and not just to me, but to Toby, who had witnessed the scene. Besides, Tamsin continued, putting her arm around Toby's shoulders, It seems to me that your grandson needs more specialized support than he's getting now. As a professional who works with children with autism, I see signs that his needs are not being fully met. What do you mean? I'm tense. I'm doing everything I can. I don't doubt that, she said softly. You're doing the best you can, and Toby is obviously very attached to you, but he also needs specialized therapy, perhaps a different educational environment, sensory integration under professional guidance, things that are difficult to provide without the proper training and resources. Grandma's doing the right thing, Toby said suddenly, taking a break from his milk. She knows how to help me when it gets too loud or too bright. Mommy and Daddy don't. Ellis took a seat next to the boy. Of course they do, Toby. Your grandmother is wonderful, but sometimes even wonderful people need help, especially when it comes to complicated things like brain development. Like neurons and synapses? Toby asked with sudden interest. I read about them in a book about the human body. Exactly, Ellis smiled. I'm a neurologist. I study that sort of thing. And Tamsin works with children whose neurons and synapses work a little differently than most. Like you. I watched this conversation with growing amazement. Ellis and Tamsin were interacting with Toby not as a problem child, but as an individual whose characteristics they recognized and respected. It was so unlike the way his own parents talked to him. Can you really help Toby? I asked as the boy looked away from me at a book he'd found on the shelf. Tamsin nodded. I've been working with children with autism for 15 years. My clinic has programs that could be very helpful for Toby. Sensory integration, social skills, learning to recognize emotions. All of these things could help him better adapt in a world that is often too loud and bright for him. But I can't afford a private clinic. I shook my head. My pension and rental income are barely enough to. Don't worry about that, Ellis interrupted. We have programs for families with limited incomes, and given the circumstances, I'm sure we'll figure something out. I looked at these two people I only knew as my tenants and couldn't believe what they were willing to do for us. Why? What have we done to deserve such kindness? Why are you helping us? I asked you bluntly. You barely know me, and you don't know Toby at all. Tamsin and Ellis looked at each other, as if deciding who to answer. Because it's the right thing to do? Ellis said simply. What happened at the restaurant tonight was wrong, and we can't just turn our backs and let it go on. Besides, Tamsin added, we've wanted to talk to you for a long time about the possibility of helping your grandson. We just didn't know how to start that conversation. Today's events, for all their unpleasantness, have given us that opportunity. I felt tears come to my eyes, not from the pain in my cheek, but from this unexpected display of humanity. For 3 years, I'd lived in a house where my care for Toby was taken for granted, where my efforts were unappreciated, where I felt increasingly invisible. And now, these almost strangers were offering something I didn't even dare ask for: professional help for my grandson and support for myself. I don't know how to thank you, I said, wiping away my tears. If I could repay you in some way. And then it hit me. I did have something to offer. Look, I straightened up in my chair, feeling a sudden surge of determination. I have a proposition. If you're willing to help Toby and me, professionally, and possibly as witnesses if the case goes to trial, I'll offer to let you live here for free, in this house. It's a small thank you for what you do. Tamsin and Ellis looked at each other in surprise. Mira, that's a very generous offer, but don't. Yes, it is, I said firmly. This house is big enough for all of us. You can stay on the second floor, and Toby and I will take the first floor. That way, Toby will be close to me, but he'll also have your professional support. And your son, Jamie, right? He could be a friend to Toby, who is in such need of positive social interaction. Tamsin shook her head thoughtfully. That would be the perfect solution. But are you sure? Giving up your rental income is a big step. I'm absolutely sure. I looked at Toby, who was sitting on the floor, thumbing through a book I'd found about space. Some things are more important than money. Toby's well-being was one of them. Ellis stood up and paced the living room, looking around the space as if he were already mentally planning how to arrange the rooms. This could work, he said finally. We could split the utilities and groceries so you wouldn't feel the financial strain. And if it goes to custody court, we'll testify about what we saw today, of course. And as for Toby's professional care, Tamsin added, I could include him in our clinical program without charge, as part of a research project I'm conducting. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Everything was working out too well, too perfectly. But before I could respond, my phone rang. Hugh's name popped up on the screen. The room was suddenly silent. Toby tensed, his fingers gripping the book tighter. Ellis and Tamsin exchanged quick glances. You don't have to answer, Tamsin said softly, especially now that you're still in shock from what happened. I stared at the blinking screen, feeling my heart pounding in my chest. Part of me wanted to just turn the phone off and forget everything that had happened. But the other part, the stronger part, knew that this conversation was inevitable. I have to answer it, I said, standing up. He wouldn't rest until he talked to me, and it would be better to do it now than to let him come here in person. I stepped out onto the veranda, shutting the door quietly behind me before I pressed the call button. Mama? Hugh's voice sounded strange, strained and hoarse, as if he were screaming or crying. Where are you? Where's Toby? We're safe, I answered, trying to keep my voice calm. In my house. Mom, he stammered, and I heard him take a deep breath. I didn't want this. I don't know what came over me. This bill, the stress at work, the trip, it's all come over me. You hit me, Hugh, I said quietly, in front of my son, and Darla threatened to kick me out of the house if I didn't pay for the dinner you invited me to. I know, and I'm terribly sorry. There was desperation in his voice. Please, just come home. We'll work it out. Forget about this trip if you want. We'll all stay home together. No, Hugh. I was surprised at the firmness in my voice. I'm not coming back, and neither is Toby. What? His tone changed immediately, becoming harsher. What do you mean you're not coming back? You can't just take my son. I can and I will. Toby needs stability and specialized care that he's not getting with you. I have witnesses to today's incident who are willing to testify if necessary. And Tamsin, my lodger, happens to specialize in working with children with autism. She can give Toby exactly the support he needs. There was silence on the other end of the line. Then Hugh spoke, his voice now menacing. You can't do that. We're his parents. You have no rights. Maybe. I tried to stay calm. But I'm willing to fight for those rights, for Toby's sake. Damn it, Mom, he raised his voice. You always do this. You always think you know better. One slap in a moment of stress, and you're ready to destroy our family? Family? I could feel the anger building up inside me. What family, Hugh? The one where you and Darla ignore your own son's needs? The one where you put all the responsibility on me and then blame me when things go wrong? The one where you plan a 3-week vacation without even discussing it with me, even though I'm supposed to be taking care of your child the whole time? It's not fair, Mother. No, Hugh, you're the one who's unfair. I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself down. Listen to me. I don't want to fight, but I'm not coming back, and Toby's staying with me. He'll be better off here, quiet, calm, and with people who really understand his needs. And how long will that last? He asked, his tone changing from aggressive to almost pitiful. A week? Two? Until you cool off? I don't know, Hugh, I answered honestly. But not for a couple of weeks, that's for sure. Toby needs stability, not constant moving back and forth. You can't just take my son, he shouted again, back to his old aggression. I won't let that happen. You can come visit, I said conciliatingly. See him, spend time together, but he'll live here. I'll sue you, Hugh threatened, for kidnapping a child. Do what you want, I said, feeling strangely calm. But think about it. Do you want a video of you beating your elderly mother in public? Witnesses to tell how you and Darla treated Toby? How you were going to leave him for 3 weeks to go on vacation? Silence again. I could almost physically feel Hugh struggling with himself on the other end of the line. I need to think, he finally said, and talk to Darla. We'll call you back. Okay, I agreed. But my decision won't change. Toby's staying with me, and you both need to think seriously about what happened today and what kind of parents you want to be for your son. I ended the call before Hugh could answer, feeling my hands shaking. It was probably the first time in years that I confronted my son without backing down, without smoothing over the conflict, without taking the blame. And despite the stress, it felt right. Back in the living room, I caught a touching scene. Toby was sitting next to Tamsin, and together they were looking at a book about space. Ellis was watching them with a soft smile. Is everything okay? He asked, noticing me. I nodded. As good as can be. Hugh's threatening to sue, but I think that's just emotion talking. Even if it goes to court, Tamsin said confidently, not taking her eyes off the book. We have a strong argument that Toby should stay with you, especially since I can provide a professional assessment of his condition and recommendations for care. So, you agree? I looked at them hopefully. Accept my offer? Ellis and Tamsin looked at each other, and she nodded. Yes, we agree. It'll be good for everyone. Toby will get the support he needs. You'll get help caring for him, and we'll be able to save money on rent and use it for Jamie's education. And Jamie will be thrilled to have a new friend, Ellis added with a smile. He was always asking when we had guests his age coming over. I looked at Toby, who seemed to already feel at home here. His shoulders were relaxed and his face was calm, such a rare state for him, especially after stress. I think we just started a new family, I said quietly, feeling the warmth in my chest. Unusual, but maybe exactly what Toby needed. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I'd made the right decision. Not the one that was convenient for everyone, not the one that avoided conflict, but the one that was truly the best for my grandson. And for myself. The morning started unusually late. I woke up around 8 when the sun was already shining through the first floor bedroom window. The room I'd once shared with my husband and was now settling back and felt both familiar and foreign. Toby was sleeping in the bed next door, the one we'd hastily made last night. Ellis had brought a spare mattress from Jamie's room. I got up quietly, trying not to wake my grandson. It had been a rough night after the emotional upheaval at the restaurant. Toby hadn't been able to settle down for a long time, despite Tamsin's best efforts. He didn't fall asleep until around midnight, clutching my hand tightly. Tamsin was already in the kitchen making tea. Good morning, Mira, she smiled when she saw me. How are you feeling? Does your cheek hurt? I gingerly touched my face. It was dull, aching, but definitely bearable. It's not that bad. Thank you for your concern. Is Toby still asleep? I nodded, accepting the offered cup of tea. It had been a difficult night, but he seemed calm now. Tamsin nodded understandingly. Children with autism often find it difficult to cope with emotional stress. Yesterday's incident was very stressful for him. It was good that he could just rest now. We were sitting at the kitchen table sipping tea when Ellis joined us. He was already fully dressed, ready for a new day. I called a colleague at Child Protective Services, he said without preamble. She's agreed to see us today at 11. The sooner we start the official process, the better. I felt my insides tighten. So soon? Shouldn't we wait a few days? Give Hugh time to cool down and… Myrrh. Tamsin interrupted me gently. Delaying will only complicate things. While everything is still fresh in the memory of witnesses, while your cheek still bears the marks of the blow, these are important factors for social services. Besides, Ellis added, we don't know what Hugh will do. He could have already reported the child abduction to the police. The thought hadn't occurred to me, and I went cold. He wouldn't. People can do a lot of things when they're angry. Ellis was serious. It's better to be safe and make it official. That way, we'd have legal grounds to keep Toby here. I understood their logic, but a part of me still resisted. Somehow, it was all happening too fast. Just yesterday morning, I was living at my son's house, doing the usual grandson care duties, and today, I was preparing to file a formal complaint against my own child. What if Hugh is right? I voiced my doubts aloud. What if I was over-dramatizing the situation? It was just one slap, in a moment of stress. Myrrh. Tamsin took my hand in hers. You know it wasn't just the slap. It was just the latest episode in a series of events that show an unhealthy family dynamic. Toby needs stability, understanding, and professional support. And from what we've seen and what you've shared, he's not getting that from his parents. I sighed, realizing she was right. The slap was just the last straw, the culmination of years of accumulated disrespect and neglect. Okay, I finally decided. Let's go to social services. But what about Toby? Should he be there? Jamie will stay with him, Ellis answered. They're the same age, and Jamie's good with special needs kids. He's already awake and excited about the idea of meeting your grandson. As if on cue, Jamie walked into the kitchen, an energetic boy with a mop of curly hair that looked just like his mother's. He smiled welcomingly at me. Good morning, Mrs. Baird. Mommy said your grandson is going to live with us. That's so great. I'll finally have a friend right in the house. His enthusiasm was contagious, and I smiled back. Good morning, Jamie. Yes, Toby will be living here. But I have to warn you, he's a little different from most kids. He needs time to get used to new people. I know, Jamie nodded with a serious look. My mom explained autism to me. I'll be patient, I promise. And I got something cool for him. He showed me a book about space and a little telescope. You said he likes the stars. We can look at Jupiter together tonight if he wants to. I was touched by his attention and understanding. This boy I barely knew was already showing more concern for Toby's needs than his own father had in years. When Toby finally woke up and joined us in the kitchen, he was quiet and wary. I introduced him to Jamie, who, following his mother's instructions, didn't rush right over to his new acquaintance, but simply waved from across the room. Hi, Toby. I'm Jamie. Your grandmother told me you like space. I've got a telescope. We can look at the stars tonight if you want. Or you don't want to? That's fine too. To my surprise, Toby looked up and replied quietly, I've seen your telescope. Is it a refractor or a reflector? Refractor, Jamie said proudly. Dad says they're better for seeing planets. That's true. Toby nodded, and I saw a spark of interest in his eyes, a rare thing to see when meeting someone new. After breakfast, Ellis Tamsin and I went to the social services office, leaving the boys in the care of the Reeves neighbor, who often helped her and Jamie. I was nervous, but the presence of my new allies gave me confidence. The social worker, a middle-aged woman with tired but attentive eyes, patiently listened to our story. I recounted the 3 years of living with Hugh and Darla, how I had gradually become Toby's primary caregiver, their unwillingness to adapt to their son's special needs, and finally, last night's incident at the restaurant. Ellis and Tamsin corroborated my account, adding their observations as witnesses and as medical professionals. Tamsin particularly detailed her professional opinion of Toby's condition and needs. Based on everything we have heard, said the social worker after a long pause, I believe we have grounds for temporary guardianship. However, I must warn you, this is only the beginning of the process. The boy's parents have the right to challenge the decision, and the court will look at all aspects of the situation. We understand, I replied. I'm not seeking to terminate Hugh and Darla's parental rights. I just want to provide Toby with the stability and support he needs. And you're willing to give him that? The social worker asked, looking me straight in the eye. At your age, caring for a child with special needs is a serious burden. I have support. I nodded toward Tamsin and Ellis. And I've been taking care of Toby for 3 years now. The only thing that will change is that the environment around us will be healthier. The social worker nodded, making notes in her notebook. Good. I'll prepare the paperwork for temporary custody. That will give you the legal right to keep your grandson with you until the court makes a final decision. But be prepared for the boy's parents to retaliate. When we returned home, we caught an amazing sight. Toby and Jamie were sitting side by side on the living room floor, looking at an astronomical chart. Toby was quietly explaining something about constellations, and Jamie was listening intently, sometimes asking questions. They didn't touch each other. Toby didn't like touching, but they sat close enough, which was a big step for my grandson. They seem to be getting along, Tamsin whispered, watching the boys. That's wonderful. The next few days passed in a flurry of settling in. The Reeves family and I officially shared the house. They took the second floor, and Toby and I took the first. Ellis helped move some furniture around to create a comfortable space for Toby that resembled his old room as much as possible. Tamsin designed a daily routine for him that included not only schoolwork, but also special sensory integration exercises. Toby, to my surprise, adapted to the new environment better than I expected. Of course, there were moments of anxiety and breakdowns, but overall he seemed relieved to be free of the constant tension that prevailed in Hugh's home. And his friendship with Jamie, developing slowly but surely, was giving him a new experience of social interaction that he had sorely lacked. On the fourth day of our new life, the phone rang. I expected it. Hugh is not one to give up easily. Mom? His voice sounded subdued, clearly in control. Darla and I would like to meet with you. To talk calmly, like adults. I don't think that's a good idea, Hugh, I replied, remembering the social worker's advice to limit contact until the court ruled. At least until there's a formal custody decision. Damn it, Mom. His self-control instantly evaporated. You stole my son. You have no right to keep him from us. I have temporary custody, Hugh. I tried to speak calmly, though my heart was racing. Formalized through social services. If you want to challenge it, go to court. So you really did it. His voice turned icy. You went against your own son, trusted some strangers more than your own family. I did what I thought was best for Toby, I said firmly. And if you really care about his well-being, you'll accept that. He hung up abruptly. I knew this wasn't the end, just the beginning of the fight. And I was right. The next day, my sister Lydia, whom we had rarely spoken to in recent years, called. Mira, what's going on? She sounded puzzled. Hugh called me yesterday, saying some strange things. That you've taken Toby away and won't let them see him? I took a deep breath and told her the whole story without leaving out the unpleasant details. Lydia was silent for a long time after my story. I always knew Hugh had a difficult temper, she said at last. But to hit his own mother, that's out of line. He's under a lot of stress. I was still trying to find excuses for what he'd done, even now. Toby can be difficult. It's no excuse, Mira, and you know it. Lydia's voice became harder. I'll talk to him. I'll try to talk some sense into him. But you're doing the right thing by protecting Toby. If you need my help, just say the word. Her support was unexpected and touching. I realized I wasn't as alone as I thought. A week after we left Hugh's house, we received word that the court had scheduled a preliminary hearing for the custody case. Ellis and Tamsin immediately contacted their lawyer, who agreed to represent me pro bono as part of an elderly assistance program. Meanwhile, life in our unusual home community was getting better. Tamsin began regular sessions with Toby, utilizing techniques she used in her clinic. Ellis often took the boys on little educational trips, to the planetarium, to the science museum, just to the park for bird watching. Jamie proved to be the perfect companion for Toby, patient, understanding, willing to adapt to his peculiarities. I've never seen Toby so relaxed, I told Tamsin one evening as we watched the boys adjust the telescope together in the garden. Even with his breakdowns and difficult moments, he seems happier here. That's because here he is accepted for who he is, Tamsin replied, without the constant expectation that he has to be normal. That's a huge difference for a child with autism. But our idyll was suddenly shattered 2 weeks after we moved in. It was a quiet Saturday night. Toby and Jamie were watching a documentary about space in the living room, and I was making dinner when a squeal of brakes sounded in the yard. A moment later, there was a banging on the door that shook the glass. "Open up at once, Mother!" Hugh's voice was distorted with rage. "I know you're in there." Toby tensed instantly, his hands going to his ears, a defensive reaction to loud noises and stress. Jamie, seeing his condition, immediately ran upstairs to get his parents. I went to the door, but didn't rush to open it. "Hugh, calm down, please. You're scaring Toby with your screaming." "Open the bloody door," he kept pounding. "I want to see my son. Now." "Hugh, you have the right to see Toby on the schedule set by social services," I tried to say calmly. "But you must give advance notice and come alone, without Darla, as recommended at this stage." "To hell with the guidelines," he yelled. "You stole my son. Open up or I'll break down the door." At that moment, Ellis and Tamsin appeared on the stairs. Ellis came to the door without a word and stood next to me. "Mr. Baird," his voice was calm but commanding, "I strongly advise you to calm down. Your behavior is only making your situation worse. If you truly care about your son's well-being, you must realize that such emotional outbursts are traumatic for him. And who the hell are you to tell me how to deal with my son?" Hugh snapped at me. "Some lodger of my mother's? Get out of my way. This is a family matter." "I'm a neurologist who specializes in working with children," Ellis replied calmly. "And right now, I'm taking care of a boy who is under extreme stress because of your behavior. I also witnessed the incident that led to the temporary custody decision. So this is not just your family matter." I could hear Hugh breathing heavily on the other side of the door, clearly fighting the urge to break it down. "Hugh," I tried to get through to him again. "Please, let's resolve this in a civilized manner. For Toby's sake. He's hearing every word you're saying right now, and he's very upset." "I want to see my son," he insisted, though his tone was a little less aggressive. "It's my right." "Yes, it is," I agreed, "but under certain conditions. Let's make an appointment for tomorrow. You'll come alone, calm, and you can spend 2 hours with Toby, as ordered by the court." There was a long pause. Then Hugh said in a different, almost pleading tone, "Just let me see him now, just for a minute. Make sure he's all right." I looked at Ellis, who shook his head faintly. Not now, Hugh. Toby's too upset. This will only make things worse for both of you. You're turning him against me. Hugh flared up again. All of you. You're putting nonsense into his head. No one has done anything like that, I said firmly. And if you go on like that, I'll have to call the police. I have an order of protection that forbids you from going near the house without prior arrangement. That was a lie. There was no warrant. But Hugh seemed to believe it. You're going to regret this, Mom. His voice became low and threatening. All of you will regret it. This is my son, and I'll take him any way I can. We heard him walk away, then the sound of a car pulling away. That's when I let myself breathe. Tamsin was already in the living room with Toby, helping him calm down with breathing exercises. Jamie was sitting next to her, quietly flipping through a book about the stars. He already knew it was helping Toby get back to normal. He'll be back, Ellis said, looking out the window at the empty street. And he might be more prepared next time. We need to be careful. I've never seen Hugh like that, I admitted, still shivering. Even at the restaurant, he was just annoyed, but not obsessed. People often react unpredictably when they feel like they're losing control, Ellis replied, especially when children are involved. For him, it's not only a matter of caring for Toby, but also a matter of pride, of power. What do we do? Apply for a permanent order of protection, Tamsin said firmly, entering the kitchen. After today's incident, we have every reason to. Toby's still shaking, even though we've been doing calming exercises for 10 minutes. I nodded, feeling a strange mixture of determination and deep sadness. I didn't want a war with my own son, but his behavior was leaving me with less and less choice. That night, when Toby finally fell asleep, exhausted from emotional distress, I sat by his bedside for a long time, looking at his face, so peaceful in his sleep. Hugh was right about one thing. Toby was his son. But now, more than ever, I realized that parenthood is not just a matter of biology. It's a matter of caring, understanding, and a willingness to put a child's needs before your own. And if I had to stand up to my own son to protect Toby, I was ready for that. You're right, there is a contradiction in the text here. If Toby stays home, he doesn't need dress clothes. Let's correct this error and end chapter 6 correctly. The day of the trial came sooner than I expected. In the 3 weeks since we'd left Hugh's house, we'd had time to create a new reality, a calm, structured reality built around Toby's needs. Every morning began the same way. Breakfast at a strictly defined time, sensory integration exercises with Tamsin, then school, which Ellis now drove him to on his way to work, followed by time for special activities, playtime with Jamie, or just quiet time in a quiet room if the day was too busy. And Toby was blossoming. Of course, he had his breakdowns. His autism hadn't gone away. But the intensity and frequency of the outbursts had decreased markedly. Tamsin attributed this to the fact that our home was the right environment, predictable, understandable, sensory-friendly. Toby doesn't have to spend so much energy dealing with the chaos around him, she said. So he has energy left over for development and even socialization. Indeed, the most surprising change has been his friendship with Jamie. Toby had never had friends before. The other children found him strange, and he didn't understand the unwritten rules of childhood socialization. But Jamie, who had grown up with a mother who worked with special children, was different. He didn't demand normalcy from Toby, didn't insist on eye contact or physical touch if Toby didn't want it. Instead, he simply shared his interests, whether it was astronomy, dinosaurs, or complex math puzzles. The morning before court, I woke Toby up a little earlier than usual to explain to him what was going to happen today. "Grandma, do I have to go to court?" he asked, still sitting up in bed. I don't like loud places with lots of people. No, sweetie. I soothingly stroked his shoulder without touching his head. He didn't like having his hair touched. You're staying home with Jamie and Mrs. Potts, the neighbor. She's bringing those cookies you liked last time, remember? He nodded, visibly relaxing. Will Dad and Mom be in court? Yes, I answered honestly. Tamsin and I agreed never to lie to Toby, even if the truth was complicated. They want you to live with them, too. I don't want to, he said firmly. It's too loud in there, and Daddy yells, and Mom keeps telling me I have to be normal. I don't know how to be normal. His words were breaking my heart. I hugged him, careful not to squeeze him too tightly. You don't have to be anything but yourself, Toby. And here, with us, you can be exactly who you are. Later, sitting in the courtroom next to our lawyer, an older but energetic man named Robert Crane, who had been recommended by Ellis, I nervously rubbed the strap of my bag. On the other side of the room sat Hugh and Darla, both of them in smart suits and stone-faced. Next to them was their lawyer, a young woman with a sharp eye and a folder full of papers. The hearing began with statements from the parties. Hugh's attorney introduced them as loving parents whose child had been kidnapped by his grandmother after a single incident of stress. She talked about the rights of parents, the importance of biological family, and that Hugh and Darla had already enrolled in anger management classes and were willing to do whatever was necessary to get their son back. When it was our turn, Robert presented a different picture. He spoke of 3 years of neglect, of his parents' unwillingness to adapt to Toby's special needs, of how they effectively shifted all the responsibility of parenting to me, and then publicly insulted and humiliated me when I dared to object. This is not a matter of a single incident, Your Honor, he emphasized. This is a matter of long-term neglect of the needs of a child with autism. And most importantly, we have a professional evaluation of Toby by Dr. Tamsin Reeves, a pediatric autism specialist, which shows a significant improvement in his condition over the 3 weeks he has been living with his grandmother. The judge, a middle-aged woman with attentive eyes, listened to both sides, asked a few clarifying questions, and then invited witnesses. Hugh and Darla were the first to speak. They talked about their love for their son, the difficulties of living with a special child, and how they had always tried to give him the best care possible. Hugh confusingly apologized for the incident at the restaurant, attributing it to accumulated stress and lack of sleep. I've never raised my hand to anyone before, he assured the judge, and I never will again. I'm already in therapy and have learned to control my emotions better. Then it was my witness's turn. Ellis and Tamsin described in detail the scene in the restaurant, Toby's reaction to it, and then his adjustment to his new home. Tamsin presented a formal report on Toby's condition, supported by test results and observations. In 3 weeks in a stable, structured environment, the boy has shown significant progress, she concluded. His sensory overload has decreased, his communication skills have improved, and he has developed an interest in social interaction with his peers. All of this indicates that his previous environment was not meeting his basic needs. I was the last to speak. Trying to remain calm, I recounted the 3 years of living with Hugh and Darla, how I gradually became Toby's primary caregiver, the growing disrespect for me and, more importantly, for their son's special needs. I'm not seeking to terminate their parental rights, I emphasized. I just want to provide Toby with a stable, understanding environment where he can develop at his own pace. And I believe Hugh and Darla can learn to be better parents to him. But it takes time, awareness, and special training. After a short break, the judge announced her decision. Temporary custody of Toby was granted to me for 6 months, with the right for Hugh and Darla to see their son regularly. During that time, they were to complete courses for parents of children with autism, family therapy, and prove that their home could be a suitable environment for Toby. In 6 months, we will review this decision, the judge concluded, and if it appears that the parents are willing to provide the child with proper care and understanding, custody may be returned to them. However, this will depend on the assessment of specialists and, just as importantly, on Toby's own wishes. As I left the courtroom, I felt a sense of relief mixed with sadness. We had won the battle, but the war was far from over. More importantly, I saw Hugh's face as the judge announced the verdict. There was anger in it, but also real pain. Whatever his faults, he loved his son. In his own inept way, but he loved him. Mom, he caught up with me outside the courthouse. Darla was behind me, arguing heatedly with their lawyer. Can we talk? Alone? I hesitated. Ellis and Tamsin, standing nearby, exchanged concerned glances. We'll wait for you in the car, Tamsin said, stepping tactfully away, but not so far that she couldn't see us. Hugh and I sat down on a bench in front of the courthouse. He looked aged, haggard, not at all like I was used to seeing him. I really love Toby, he said after a long silence. I know I haven't always shown it. Right? But he's my son, and I love him. I know, Hugh, I replied softly. I've never doubted it. Then why did you take him? There was genuine pain in his voice. Why didn't you give me a second chance? Because it wasn't about second chances. I stared straight at him, feeling the words I'd held back for so many years finally find their way out. You've gotten chance after chance all these 3 years. Every day was a chance to really get to know your son, to understand his needs, to tailor your life to his specifics. But instead, you took the easiest way out, handing him over to me and then blaming me when things went wrong. Hugh lowered his eyes. I didn't know what to do. He's so different. Not the way I imagined my son to be. He is exactly as he is, I said firmly. And it's nobody's fault. Autism isn't a curse or a disease. It's just a different way of seeing the world. And your job as a father is not to fix him, but to learn to live in his world, to help him develop at his own pace. We were silent again. Somewhere in the distance, an ambulance siren sounded, reminding me of the first days after Toby's diagnosis, when we were all in a panic, not knowing what to do. What am I supposed to do? Hugh finally asked, and there was sincerity in his voice. To get my son back, to make things right, to take the course as the court ordered, I answered, but not just to check off a box, to really dig in, to understand what Toby needs. Create an environment at home that he's comfortable in, quiet, predictable, structured. Learn to recognize the signs of sensory overload before it becomes a breakdown. And most importantly, accept him for who he is. Not to expect him to be normal, but to love his peculiarities, to see them not as a flaw, but simply as another way of being. Hugh nodded, and I saw tears in his eyes. What about you? He asked quietly. Can you ever forgive me? For everything. The restaurant, the 3 years, I love you, Hugh. I interrupted him. You're my son, but my patience is wearing thin. Learn to respect others. Start with your own son, and then we can talk about repairing our relationship. He looked like he wanted to say something else but changed his mind. Instead, he just nodded, got up from the bench, and without looking back, walked toward Darla, who was waiting impatiently for him at her car. I stared after him, feeling a strange mixture of sadness and relief. Our family was broken, and I didn't know if we'd ever be able to put it back together. But I was sure of one thing. Toby deserved better, and I would do everything I could to give it to him. In the following weeks, the Reeves family and I formalized our unusual cohabitation agreement. I drew up a document that allowed Ellis and Tamsin to live in my house rent-free in exchange for their professional help with Toby. It was a win-win for everyone. Toby got access to specialized support that would normally cost thousands of dollars. I got help caring for my grandson and peace of mind, and the young family of doctors saved a significant amount of money on rent, allowing them more time to focus on work and family. It's the perfect situation for everyone, Tamsin said as we signed the papers. I can include Toby in my research program, which gives him access to the latest techniques for working with autism. Jamie is gaining a friend he never had. Other children are often put off by his nerdiness, as they call it. He, like Toby, has a hard time finding others who share his interests. And this arrangement will allow Ellis and I to set aside enough money for Jamie's future education, she added with a smile. Plus, we live in a beautiful house with a wonderful hostess. I was embarrassed by her words. After 3 years of living with Hugh and Darla, where my housework and Toby's care had been taken for granted, it was strange to hear such sincere gratitude. We paid special attention to creating the right environment for Toby. His room was remodeled with all his sensory features in mind: soft, not too bright lighting, soundproofing, minimum visual stimuli. In the living room, there was a special corner with a weighted blanket and headphones for when the world got too loud or bright. But the main project was the creation of a sensory corner in the garden. It was Ellis's idea to set up part of the yard so that Toby and Jamie could spend time there, doing their favorite things in a natural but controlled environment. On a sunny Saturday morning, a month after the trial, we all worked together on this project. Ellis and the boys were setting up supports for a small observatory. Nothing complicated, just a place to place a telescope on a stable platform. Tamsin was creating a sensory trail, a pathway of different materials to stimulate tactile sensations, and I was planting aromatic herbs, lavender, rosemary, mint, plants with pleasant, soothing scents. "Look, Grandma," Toby called out to me. He rarely took the initiative to communicate, so every time he did, it was a small victory. Jamie and I made a platform for the telescope. It's level. I checked it with a level. "Well done." I stepped closer, admiring their creation. "So, you'll be able to see the stars tonight?" Yes, Jamie was as excited as Toby. "Venus will be visible tonight, and maybe we'll see the Perseid meteors. We can time each meteor exactly," Toby added seriously, "and compare our results with the observatory data. Then it would be a real scientific observation." I smiled as I watched the boys plan their scientific observations together. They were so different. Jamie noisy, energetic, full of ideas. Toby quiet, focused, methodical. But together, they made a perfect pair, complementing each other. Ellis, noticing my smile, came over to me. "They've hit it off," he said quietly. "Jamie is learning to be more organized and attentive to detail, and Toby is discovering the joy of sharing his interests with someone who really understands." "I never thought it was possible," I admitted. "All these years I was afraid that Toby would always be alone, that the other kids would never accept him." "It's not that the other kids are bad," Tamsin said softly, joining us. "It's just that most of them lack understanding and patience. Jamie has grown up in a family where differences are valued, not seen as a problem. It gives him a different perspective." We continued working, and by late afternoon, the sensory corner was almost complete. A small observatory, a sensory trail, a scented garden, a hammock for relaxation, protected from bright light by a canopy. This place became a symbol of our new beginning, our unusual family, created not by blood ties, but by shared care and understanding. As the sun began to set, we all sat together at the garden table, tired but satisfied with the work we had done. Toby and Jamie were already setting up the telescope, preparing for nighttime observations. You know, I said, looking at our shared creation, I used to think that family was all about blood ties, that being a good mother and grandmother meant supporting your family at all costs, even if it hurt you or those you were supposed to protect. And now? Tamsin asked, looking at me with understanding. Now I know that a real family is someone who really cares about each other, regardless of blood ties, who see you as a person, not a function, who values your contributions and respects your boundaries. Ellis silently raised his teacup as if making a toast. To new beginnings, he said, and to the radical changes that are sometimes necessary to find the right solution. We clinked cups, and I felt truly happy for the first time in years. Yes, there were still many challenges ahead. The trial, Toby's therapy, perhaps reconciliation with Hugh if he did change. But now, at this moment, in our little garden, with the people who had become my new family, I finally felt at home.